Mic check 1 2 1 2. It's the Y2K collector. And there's something about the end of an era that makes me feel a little bit happy and a little bit sad. What do I mean? Well, this week was the last week that Pat Sajak served as the host of the ever popular game show Wheel of Fortune. And if you grew up in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, I mean, if you grew up in the last 40 to 50 years watching any TV game show at any point, you've seen at least one episode of Wheel of Fortune. And that show is a staple in game show history. Pat Sajak is a staple in he is a staple in terms of game show hosts. And just seeing him bow out, exit stage left, just a few years after Alex Trebek, who was the host of Jeopardy, bow out as well, it just kind of reminds me how time is just marching on. And whenever I think about shows like Wheel of Fortune, I think about my childhood and how it was a show that my family would watch on weeknights, almost every weeknight. You know, it was the 30 minutes that you could come together and just have a little family fun. And at that time, at that point in my life, the Game Boy was the only video game that I had, especially in the early 90s. And for a long time, Super Mario Land was the only game that I actually had for the Game Boy. And it's crazy. You know, I remember when the era of the original Game Boy ended, and we started seeing things like the Game Boy Advance, and then eventually Game Boy SD and all that. It just kind of reminded me of a time where we had to move on. And whenever I see things like that happen, it's definitely marks a point in history where it's like, all right, I remember when this era ended. And it makes me think about the era that we're in when it comes to video games. And I've said this on my channel before, and I don't know if I'm the only one who feels this way, but I don't know if there is going to be another console era, a real console era like the eras that we've seen of video game consoles in the past. We've seen how the 8th generation of gaming consoles have, for lack of better terms, just pretty much flopped. Will people buy them? Have people bought PlayStation 5s? Yes. Have people bought, Xbox, the new Xbox? Yes. But I feel like the era of just video game consoles is coming to a close. Like it's an era that I think is going to have to die, for lack of better terms, so that the next generation of technology can step in. And you might be saying, well, Y2K, what is that? I think that's AI. I think the next generation is a combination of virtual reality and artificial intelligence. But I don't think that the general public is ready for it yet. I don't know if, let me say it this way, I don't know if we're ready for it yet. Because if you think like PlayStation 5s are expensive, well, let me tell you this. The next generation of gaming in terms of virtual reality is going to be even more expensive. And I think one of the biggest reasons why we haven't transitioned into the next generation of gaming being virtual reality and AI is because companies have not figured out how to scale it down yet to a place where it can be affordable for the average consumer. I mean, take the Apple Vision Pro, for example. I went and did a demo of the Apple Vision Pro a few months ago, and I highly recommend anyone who hasn't done it yet, I strongly recommend you go ahead and do it, because it's going to really blow you away. But without getting into details about it, it's an experience in and of itself. It is truly mind-blowing how realistic it is. And what's even more mind-blowing than the realism is the price tag, because you could either buy a used car or you could buy the Apple Vision Pro. That's how expensive that thing is. I'm talking thousands of dollars. And I think that's part of the reason why it hasn't taken off yet the way they're hoping it will. Now, do I think that the technology will advance? Yes. Do I think that they'll be able to scale it to a point where it's not $4,000 and $5,000 and maybe they can get it down to $1,000 or maybe under $1,000? Possibly in the future. But I believe that that's the only thing holding us up from launching off into the next generation of gaming, and not even just gaming, but just, you know, computer use in general. Artificial intelligence and virtual reality is the next technological step. That's what I think. Because I don't think we're really going to be moving the needle too much by just producing more consoles and making more computers and more gaming PCs. We're not going to move the needle any further, because the only thing we're going to do is, I mean, I guess if there were to be a bridge between where we're at now and virtual reality, is maybe there will be a console where the games that you play have lifelike simulations, meaning the characters that you see on the screen no longer look like 3D images, but they actually look like human beings. And it looks like you're actually controlling real life people in a video game. That to me is the only next step between where we're at now and virtual reality. But once we're able to tackle that, once we're able to play games with realism, with realistic looking human beings and realistic environments, once we conquer that frontier, the only next step, the natural progression, is to go virtual reality mode. And I think at that point, once we do get to that point, people will then have the ability to truly live in their own reality. Truly. And that's a little scary. That's a little scary, because reality, like the one reality, the one universal reality that we all know, right? Like the sky being blue, the grass being green. The reality that we currently live in isn't always so great. It's not always fun. It's not always pleasant. Are there good things about this reality? Yeah, you have good days, the sun shines, babies are born, we have pleasurable experiences. But there's also another side of that coin. Days where it rains, days where there's death, days where there's dismay and misery. And I think if you give people an option to create their own reality, 9 times out of 10, they're going to create a reality where nothing bad exists and it's all pleasure. And at that point, we're in dangerous waters. So went a little deep there on a Friday night. It is Friday, so we have the room to be deep. But think about that. When you're up tonight, think about it. What would it be like if you were able to create your own reality? And how much do you think people would pay for a device that gives you that ability? Goodbye, Pat Sajak. It's been real. I'm the Y2K Collector. Hope you had a good week. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Take it easy.